Tonight in Democracy 20, honoring those at the United Nations who played a crucial role in the dismantling of apartheid.
We're grateful indeed for those people who played a sterling role in exile, Miriam Makebas that was spoken, many other ambassadors, Oliver Tambo and many others, leaders who waged the struggle outside the country.
From pariah state to the darling of the international diplomatic community. And looking back in history, on this day 17 years ago, Cabinet adopted new cross-border measures to fight the scourge of crime inside the country. Well, good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Democracy 20. Next week, this time, the general elections will be in full swing. But for thousands of South Africans in countries around the world, the elections got underway today as they cast their ballots. As we ask you, obviously been asking you throughout the show, please do take part in the program. You can do this by emailing us your views to elections@sabc.co.za, or if you prefer, you can send us a text message or an SMS, this to 33726. Remember to begin your message with the word vote, and each SMS will cost you R1.50. For tweets, use the hashtag SABC elections, and you can also send us messages, this on our Facebook page. Find us on SABC News online, and do send us your comments. We appreciate them as much as they come in. Now, for our first story of the evening, Nelson Mandela's appearance, this at the United Nations as South Africa's first democratically elected president, was a landmark moment for the World Organization and for Madiba himself. In a memorable speech to the General Assembly on October the 3rd, 1994, Madiba paid tribute to the United Nations for its role in the fight against apartheid. The UN's Committee Against Apartheid, in particular, has been held as having been an indispensable resource during the struggle years. U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce Pease caught up with the man who has been credited for much of the committee's success, E.S. Reddy.
2 months shy of his 90th birthday and long retired from the UN, E.S. Reddy is widely acknowledged as playing probably the most consistent and influential role in the organization against apartheid in South Africa.
In terms of preparing this strategy and trying to prepare the documents, resolutions, that type of thing, and the procedures and so on, well, I think I was crucial. But I could do nothing because I was only a member of the Secretariat. Without the Special Committee on Apartheid taking over, I would make suggestions to them. They take over. They go to the General Assembly and get action. They go to the Security Council and get action, or go to the public and get action.
His real interest in the country began at a protest march against South Africa right here in New York in 1946. But he was also concerned with the plight of the Indian population in the country and their cooperation with black South Africans in the struggle. Joining the UN in 1949, he would begin to chip away at a system that, as we all now know, would remain in place for the next 45 years.
It's a long process. Unfortunately, it was a very long process in the UN and in South Africa itself in the liberation struggle. In 1946, it was very hard to get a resolution on South Africa because the UN was dominated by the Western countries.
We were not just one voice, we're not all reading from the same page. You had people there within the United Nations who pursued their own agendas.
In the absence of firm UN action, the Committee Against Apartheid mobilized global publicity against the regime while setting up a trust fund that funneled millions of dollars to provide lawyers for prisoners and assisted their families. But momentum began to shift in the 60s.
In 1960, 14 African countries got independent. That is the year of the Sharpeville also. That is when the UN Security Council for the first time took up the question of apartheid.
So, in 1960, the Security Council took up the question of apartheid. In 62, the General Assembly passed a resolution deeming South Africa's racist policies in violation of the UN Charter. In 63, the Council urged all states to cease arms sales and shipments to the country. And due to years of lobbying by the Committee Against Apartheid, South Africa had its credentials revoked from all work of the General Assembly in 1974.
They were removed from the General Assembly. They could not sit in the General Assembly because their credentials are not recognized.
Reddy would host a number of delegations, among them the first ANC delegation in 1963, which included Secretary-General Duma Nokwe, NEC members Robert Resha and Tennyson Makiwane. He showed us pictures of a UN reception for former ANC President Oliver Tambo, seen with Miriam Makeba in 1963, who also famously addressed the Special Committee on the realities non-whites faced in the country of her birth.
Mr. Chairman, you and the committee know that the political situation in my country is tense and is even growing more tense. This, therefore, does not leave us with any option but to ask the United Nations to take positive action against the South African government. By positive action, I mean, of course, that the United Nations should put into action the very good resolutions calling for a complete boycott on South Africa and especially the sending of arms by outside powers to South Africa. I have not the slightest doubt that these arms will be used against the African women and children.
Reddy and Oliver Tambo formed a firm friendship.
He came here in 1963 for the General Assembly, shortly before the Rivonia trial. And he stayed here for 2 months. And I used to see him almost every day, and he used to come to my office, and we used to have lunch together. And so we became very close friends. And actually, Adelaide Tambo wrote to me, and he said, "You are not only a friend of Oliver Tambo, you are his brother." So that was such an intimate relationship.
We're grateful indeed for those people who played a sterling role in exile, the Miriam Makebas that were spoken, many other ambassadors, Oliver Tambo and many others, leaders who waged the struggle outside the country.
In 1984, the Security Council declared null and void the new racist constitution of South Africa, and in 1989, the UN General Assembly adopted a declaration on apartheid and its destructive consequences, calling for negotiations. A year later, Nelson Mandela was able to visit the UN for the first time.
We feel especially honored and privileged to have the possibility today to stand at this particular place, to speak to all of you who represent the peoples of the world.
Reddy had just one regret.
So here I was still alive when this happened. I wish Oliver Tambo was alive.
Enuga S. Reddy was last year awarded the Order of Companions of O.R. Tambo in silver for his excellent contribution to the fight against apartheid. Unlike so many, he was fortunate to live to see the fruits of his labor. Sherwin Brycepe's SABC News, New York.
Nice piece indeed, Sherwin. Thank you very much. Now, after the break, we take a look at the second half of our insert about the role of the United Nations in the fight against apartheid. Stay with us. Democracy 20 follows after this. Welcome back. Now, post-democracy and the international diplomatic community was eager to embrace South Africa. At the United Nations, South Africa had some major contributions to make as well.
This was not a very happy place if one were a South African diplomat prior to 1994, and although it took decades at the UN to impose tangible measures against the apartheid regime, measures that really only began to have teeth in the 70s and 80s, we understand that the isolation of South Africa's diplomats began as early as the 1960s, when I'm told the South African ambassador would be seated in the delegates' lounge all by himself, and very few of his diplomatic colleagues would go over to say hello.
During Nelson Mandela's first visit to the UN in 1990 on his inaugural trip to the United States post his release, the doors were flung wide open for the ANC's then deputy president, who addressed the UN's Committee Against Apartheid at a sitting of the General Assembly.
It will forever remain an indelible blight on human history that the apartheid crime ever occurred. It will forever remain an accusation and a challenge to all men and women of conscience that it took as long as it has before all of us stood up to say, enough is enough.
South Africa's current ambassador to the UN reflects on a time when a clear crime against humanity, as the consensus on apartheid today reflects, was a battle of national agendas.
There was a lot at stake at the time. You recall this was also during the times of the Cold War and so on, and we had people actually saying South Africa is a friend in the battle and the agendas that they were pursuing. That look, if you were to choose amongst those who were waging struggle and those who were supporting apartheid, maybe in this battle that we're having, much bigger battle insofar as they were concerned, the Cold War, we would rather opt for this ones. And we're ready, in fact, as you say, to trample on the human rights of people.
With the country's first democratic election and the installation of Madiba as president, South Africa was allowed to again proudly take her seat among the community of nations.
You're respected.
Mamabolo believes the country is highly respected due to its background of struggle.
When we speak to those issues, be it peace and security, be it human rights, be it about socio-economic development, be it about poverty, eradication of poverty, be it about the fairness in the international systems, the reform of the United Nations, the reform of the Bretton Woods institutions and so on. People know that we genuinely mean it. We mean it because we had been on the receiving side at some stage.
Since 1994, the country has strongly advocated rules-based multilateralism, currently holding a seat in the UN's Economic and Social Council, while completing a third term in the Human Rights Council in Geneva. South Africa has also completed 2 terms as a non-permanent member of the Security Council, first in 2007 and more recently in 2011.
The issue of UN reform, particularly that of the UN Security Council, has been part of South Africa's agenda at the United Nations since 1994. It's a matter first raised by Nelson Mandela in the early 1990s and then by every South African president since.
Much like apartheid, Ambassador Mamabolo believes this is not an easy fight.
Again, it's national agendas of other peoples, and they're protecting their interests. They have enjoyed some of them. The ability to dominate the world by taking decisions, and so would not want to let go that easy, some of them. And so you create a whole lot of problems in sort of acceding to this very genuine request. But look, I think if you look at it today, because of the continuing fight that you talked about, which was started by Nelson Mandela, Roligo Tambo, and many others, we are much more closer to having these representations today, more than we were so many years ago.
The country received further endorsements of its new status at the UN with the appointment of South African Judge Navi Pillay as High Commissioner for Human Rights in 2008 and former Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka as only the second Executive Director of UN Women, a ringing endorsement of a country and her people after decades where the cold shoulder was far more appropriate than a firm handshake. I'm Sherwin Bryce-Pease in New York.
Democracy20 takes a quick break. Stay with us right on SABC3 as well as SABC News Channel 404. Welcome back. Now, South Africa's Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe travelled to London this month to thank the people of Britain for their solidarity and support before and during the country's 2 decades of democracy. His visit signals the importance of relations between the two countries, although these relations have not always been smooth or on par. Catherine Drew takes a closer look at this.
This is part of the history of our struggle. This is part of our friends who supported us at the worst of times.
South Africa's new High Commissioner in London, Obed Mlaba, is still familiarising himself with the impressive South Africa House, which lies at the heart of London and sports this mural. The former mayor of Durban has taken up the post at a busy time.
Yes, it's quite a massive job. We're all but looking forward to a very productive kind of a relationship which has got a very beautiful history.
He immediately had to get involved with the planning of the Nelson Mandela Memorial in Westminster Abbey, where London's political leaders mixed with celebrities and those who had devoted their lives to campaign against apartheid. He's also deeply engaged in the various events being held to mark South Africa's 2 decades of democracy. But the close relationship South Africa has enjoyed with Britain over the past 20 years and before, when London was the headquarters of the global anti-apartheid campaign, has recently taken a battering. President Zuma was scheduled to attend the Westminster Memorial hosted by Queen Elizabeth II. It's not clear who pulled out first, but the failure of both of these figures to attend led to accusations that President Zuma had snubbed Britain's Queen. British officials were also caught off guard when South Africa did not send a government minister to attend the recent conference on illegal wildlife trade and issued a very public rebuttal to the conclusions of the conference. However, the High Commissioner cautions that good friends are allowed to disagree.
You never will get a good friend unless you fight with a friend. It's normal. If there are issues, you put them on the table and you talk. I've never seen one family where everything just goes smooth all the time. If you do so, it means you are not being honest to each other.
Disagreements between the two countries are not uncommon. London's visa clampdown in 2009 required South African citizens to apply for visas to visit Britain, a requirement that only runs one way. A year ago, the British government abruptly announced an end to direct aid to South Africa as from 2015, apparently without first informing Pretoria. Those sympathetic to South Africa view the differences between the two countries as a sign of a healthy relationship.
But I think it's a sign of political maturity that there is this real debate, political debate going on in South Africa now. That's good.
There's no doubting the esteem in which South Africa's late leader is held here in Britain. This statue of Mandela, unveiled to the man himself in 2007, sits right opposite Britain's Houses of Parliament. But how will relations between the two countries fare in a post-Mandela era? And will historic ties be enough to keep those relations on track? Conservative MP Anne McIntosh chairs the British South Africa All-Party Parliamentary Group dedicated to extending continued good relations between the two countries.
The face of the South African government will have changed, the face of the British government will have changed over these crucial developments we've seen over the last 10, 15 years. So there will always be a challenge, but I think we do remain very committed to each other. It is one of our major trading partners, and it is an area where the government has really identified that the UK trading investment partnership really, and the Prime Minister is very keen, the Foreign Secretary very keen that we improve trade, and two ways.
And that emphasis on trade is equally a top priority for South Africa's new High Commissioner in a bid to create jobs back home, particularly for young people. Indeed, Britain faces its own economic and unemployment woes, and any growth in exports or trade with South Africa would be welcome.
If we work hard to attract the investors and assure them that the new government has a plan, the new government is focused on ensuring no further, any more fights and no conflicts, but what we are looking at is how we work together to develop our country and part of our continent. I think the UK will be a better partner to do that.
Britain will be celebrating South Africa's 20 years of democracy with events around the country. Indeed, South Africa's Deputy President will visit London at the end of April to take part in celebrations. But as new political generations come to the fore in both countries, relations will have to find a new footing as the historic links of solidarity fade into history. Catherine Drew, SABC News, London.
Coming back home now, there's mixed reaction to what extent democracy has helped the people of Rimfasmark in the Northern Cape. It was the first successful land claim in post-democracy South Africa.
Rimfasmark means to tie a piece of leather tightly. It can hardly be called a paradise. It's an area known for its rugged wilderness. But the fight for this area of 74,000 hectares of land has been fierce, and in the end it had a happy ending. It started in 1973 when the first batches of stock farmers were forcibly removed and sent to the then Southwest Africa or the Ciskei. The struggle to return to the land started almost immediately, but it would take 2 decades before they would set foot in Rimfasmark again. In the meantime, the property was transferred to the then South African Defence Force. It was used as a weapons testing site. Tanks, other heavy artillery and mortars were tested before they were sent into combat. Then the military training site became a place of celebration. It was the first successful land claim, and Rimfasmark was handed back to the community shortly after the first democratic elections in 1994. Most of the original residents were back on their land at the end of 1995. Today, life has returned to normal at Rimfasmark.
I'm happy because now I can raise my kids here.
The community has big plans, but they remain deeply vested in stock farming.
Ek het al woorde van die regering se kant, die mense wat sê hulle kom in die naam van die regering. We need some help to buy sheep because we were left behind.
In the last 20 years, a great deal has changed at Rimfasmark. The residents now have a bridge to cross the mighty Orange River instead of a small, dangerous boat. And in this arid land, they've managed to cultivate grapes, a source of pride and income for many.
We are going to work here in the garden. We have the grapes and everyone here has jobs.
The school, however, remains a problem. Rimfasmark is fairly isolated and sending their children to nearby towns is not an option.
Our children need to go to school. They can't go to school in that for much longer.
Rimfasmark has a great deal to offer tourists, apart from its breathtaking rugged beauty. The hot springs are a huge attraction, as are the 3 4x4 routes, hiking trails, easy enough for the average hiker, bird watching, and it is a paradise for photographers. For the next few years, the community intends developing these attractions. Ulrich Hendricks, SABC News, Rimfasmark in the Northern Cape.
Now let's take a look at what happened on this day in history. Government announced that the number of border passes open for commercial traffic would soon be substantially reduced. This was part of a new measure adopted by Cabinet to curb cross-border crime in a step towards fighting crime in the country. This report was broadcast by SABC News on the 30th of April 1997.
South Africa has 95 border posts, which aren't properly controlled at the moment. The country loses billions of rands a year because of smuggling. Lack of border control is seen as a major reason for the crime levels in the country. Today, Cabinet decided that the number of border posts open for bulk commercial traffic be reduced from 52 to 19. That international airports authorized to clear flights be reduced from 36 to 8. And that new stricter procedures be adopted at all border posts. None of the 95 border posts will however be closed for tourism, but measures will be adopted to ensure that border control is more effective. All goods, including cars, will in future have to be declared at border posts. Government says the new measures should have a major impact on crime levels in the country. These measures will be introduced at land ports within the next 3 months, and the changes will be completed at airports within 6 months. Linda van Tilburg, SABC, Pretoria.
And that's all we have for you tonight. And unfortunately, well, that is Democracy20 will be back again tomorrow evening, though, at 6:30, same place, same time, SABC News channel, SABC3 rather, and then SABC News channel 404. Thanks for joining us. The English news follows immediately after this. Good night.